You're all right now. Drink this, it's warm. Nice and slow, that's it.
If a strange creature lay dying on your doorstep in the middle of a snowy night, would you save it or let it disappear into the darkness? Caleb chose to save it. Unknowingly, he was the one who was saved. In the dead of winter, somewhere on the edge of the Appalachian forest, a man finds a small, freezing creature collapsed on his porch. He doesn't know what it is, only that it's alive, and that if he doesn't act, it won't survive the night. So he takes it in, warms it, speaks to it, and somehow it listens. Not like an animal, not like anything he's ever studied. It reacts like a child, like it understands. He calls it Kindle, a small flame in the middle of all that cold. And as days pass, he realizes he didn't just save it. It's saving him too. But Kindle doesn't belong to this world alone. There are footprints in the snow, watching eyes beyond the trees. This isn't just a story about a strange creature. It's about grief, about healing, and about a kind of love that doesn't need to be explained. This story found you for a reason. So tell me, where are you watching from? What's your name, dear viewer? And how far do you think this story can go if we share it together? If your heart stirred even a little, tap like, subscribe, and join us. Let's build a home for stories like Kindle's, for believers, seekers, and everyone who still hopes Bigfoot is out there, and that maybe he's watching over us too. The wind had no rhythm that morning, only violence. It came down from the Tetons like a predator, low, lunging, snapping at the eaves of the small log cabin tucked into the northern edge of Shoshone Forest. It was January 7th, 1992, just before 5 a.m. The thermometer nailed to the post outside Caleb Bishop's porch had already shattered from the cold sometime after midnight. It didn't matter. The kind of cold that came now didn't need measuring. You felt it in your teeth, in your bones, in the way silence clung to everything like a warning. Caleb stirred beneath the heavy quilt, boots still on, fire long dead. He hadn't slept long, hadn't slept right in years. Something had woken him. Not a sound, not movement, just a shift. That inexplicable shift in the air that told a man alone too long that something had changed outside. He stood, joints aching as they always did in the cold. Crossed the room slowly, the boards creaking under his weight. Reached the door and opened it no wider than his shoulder. The porch was buried in ice shadow, the kind that held no softness, only form. And at the top of the stairs, just 3 feet from his boots, it sat. Not moved, not looked up, just sat, a shape. Low, wide, slumped. At first glance, it could have been a pile of furs left by some hunter who'd lost his mind. Could have been a bear cub curled up to die, but no. Caleb's mind, though weathered, still held its edge. And his instincts weren't wrong. It was the stillness that caught him. That unnatural stillness. Not the kind of a body after death, but the kind held in moments before waking. He stepped forward, slowly, breath held. The thing didn't flinch. Snow had gathered on its shoulders, but not in a way that suggested it had fallen long ago. It was still clinging, still fresh, still settling. He crouched. Closer now, closer than caution would have allowed in any other life. Then he saw it. The slow rise, then fall. It was breathing. He stared. Long enough for the cold to bite his knees. Then longer still. He did not call for help. He did not reach for a rifle. Instead, Caleb exhaled and whispered, "Hell." Not in fear, not in shock, but in recognition. He moved quickly after that. The kind of quick that came with clarity, not panic. Opened the door wide, shoved back chairs, cleared the hearth. He returned with the wool tarp he used for injured elk. It took everything he had to lift it. Whatever it was heavy, dense with cold, dense with secrets. He did not drag it by the limbs. He lifted from beneath, tucked his arms under the torso, felt the dense mat of fur give slightly under the weight of frozen muscle. It moaned then, barely audible. A low, throaty vibration that wasn't pain and wasn't warning. Something closer to comfort. He pulled the creature inside, letting the heatless room welcome it like a cave would a dying thing. He didn't light the fire yet. Too sudden a shift, and it would die from shock. Caleb knew that. Had seen it with deer too long trapped in snowdrifts. Had tried to save a lynx once, years ago. Used a propane heater too fast. It died on his lap while his brother Grant watched in silence. He worked slowly now, with the care of a man who knew what not to do. Blankets, then warmth by layers. A pot of goat milk warmed on the stove, not boiled, just above skin temperature. He placed it in a shallow bowl and waited. The creature didn't move, so he massaged its back, slowly, over the thick, wet coat. Circular motions, small pressure. Same way he used to soothe Grant's seizures back in the VA hospital. The breathing began to steady. He said nothing. He kept his hands steady. He made no sound except for the movements themselves. The creak of the floor, the soft rustle of wool, the low clink of ceramic against wood. No thoughts about what it was. Not yet. That would come later. When the breathing evened out, Caleb allowed himself to lean back, just far enough to take in the shape fully now that it lay beside the fireplace. It wasn't a bear. The shoulders were too squared, the spine too straight. The hands, yes, hands, lay curled at its chest, like a child bracing against cold. 5 fingers, but the thumb, opposable. It had thumbs. Caleb's throat tightened, but he didn't move, didn't even blink. The left thumb flexed once, not a spasm, not a twitch. It moved. He sat back. The breath returned to him in one long, low exhale. Something ancient stirred beneath the skin of this thing. Something not feral but formed, not beast but built. Later, when he stood to fetch more wood, he stepped outside. The air slapped him hard, sharp, metallic cold. But what he saw stole the air right back. Footprints. Huge. They circled the cabin. Not a random scatter, not aimless. A precise path, around, not across. They never stepped onto the porch. They had stopped just short, just shy of the top step. And there, at the foot of the stairs, a smooth patch of snow. Perfectly clean, as if something or someone had knelt there for a long time, then stood, then walked away, back into the forest. Caleb turned slowly. The woods didn't speak, but they didn't hide either. Not tonight. Inside, the creature stirred. He returned quickly, bolted the door, stoked the fire now, slow and steady, and sat close, closer than he should have. It murmured again, a low sound, like a lullaby sung through a hollow log. Not language, but not wild either. He didn't answer at first. Didn't dare. But as the firelight climbed the walls and the ice began to melt from its fur, Caleb did what he hadn't done in years. He spoke. Softly, carefully. Not an explanation, just presence. Feels like Wyoming's trying to freeze us both out tonight. The creature didn't reply, but its head turned slightly, just enough, toward the sound, toward the voice. Not in fear, not in confusion, but something else. Recognition? Or just warmth? Like sound itself carried heat. That was how Grant used to respond in his final days. When words didn't make sense anymore, but a voice still carried meaning, still held comfort. Caleb felt something uncoil in his chest. Something buried too long. He didn't name it. He just watched the creature sleep. Hours passed. Morning didn't come, at least not with light. The storm held. The cold deepened. But inside, the fire grew. The cabin breathed again, and when the creature stirred once more, lifting its head just barely, eyes still closed, breath deep and steady, Caleb knew this wasn't an animal he'd saved. This wasn't a fluke of mercy or madness. He had pulled something conscious from the edge of death, something with memory, something with law, something that might remember him too. And as the snow piled deeper on the roof and the logs cracked in the hearth, He sat beside it, awake, silent. A man returned to life by the presence of something the world would never believe in. But he knew that was enough. And the forest? It hadn't left either. It was watching, just beyond the line of the trees, waiting to see what kind of man Caleb Bishop still was, and whether kindness still had a place in a world colder than any storm. Morning never really came that day. The gray light smeared across the sky like an old bruise, soft and unwilling. The storm had eased, but the temperature hadn't forgiven. Wind slithered along the cabin's seams like something alive, probing for weakness, but inside, the silence held. A fire crackled gently in the hearth. Blankets rose and fell in slow rhythm beside the stonework. The creature, still alive, still sleeping, still a mystery. Caleb Bishop stood by the window, a mug of black coffee going cold in his hand. He hadn't shaved, hadn't changed, hadn't spoken a word since his own voice the night before had stirred the thing's head in the dark. Now daylight, if you could call it that, offered no clarity, only consequences. He told himself he'd give it a night, a single act of mercy, just until it could breathe again. Then let someone else make the hard call. But dawn made him a liar. He set the mug down, walked across the room. The rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall hadn't rung in weeks, maybe months. Dust had settled in the cradle. He wiped it off with the edge of his sleeve and picked it up. There were only 2 numbers he'd ever bothered to memorize. One was Grant's, now disconnected. The other belonged to Dr. Reuben Calder in Jackson Hole. It rang twice, then a pause, a third time, then a click, followed by a slow inhale and a voice, scratchy from sleep or age. Maybe both. "Bishop?" Caleb stared out the window. His breath fogged the glass. "I need your ear, Reuben, just your ear." Another breath. Then the chair creaked on the other end of the line. Reuben always sat when things got real. "I'm listening." Caleb spoke low, slow, measured, like words themselves might be dangerous if they came too fast. "I found something outside the cabin, or it found me." "Dead?" "No." A long pause. "Animal?" "No." Even longer this time. "Then you're going to have to give me more than that." "It was dying. I brought it in. It's still breathing." "Caleb, Jesus." "It has thumbs." That silenced even the line. No hum, no static, just emptiness that stretched too long. Finally, Reuben's voice returned. Tight, flat. "Tell me you didn't say that out loud to anyone else." "I haven't left the mountain." "Good." More silence. "You remember what happened to that couple near Bighorn back in '86? Reuben's voice had dropped into a lower gear now. One Caleb recognized. "They took one in," Reuben said. "Thought it was injured. Kept it in a barn for 4 days. The man disappeared. The woman called in a panic. By the time Fish and Wildlife got there, barn was gone, burned to the foundation. No prints, no remains. Her house was cleared. Even her dog. She vanished 3 weeks later. Off a county road. Truck still idling." Caleb closed his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't know who cleared it, and neither does anyone else." He opened his eyes again and looked at the figure curled near the fireplace. "It's not hostile," Caleb said. "It made a sound when I touched it. Not like an animal, more like—" He trailed off. Like what? Like it was trying to soothe itself. There was a rustle of paper on the line. Reuben was writing something, or crossing something out. "You're in it now, Bishop, whether you meant to be or not." "I can bring it in. I just need time. Let it recover." "No." The answer cut hard. "You don't bring it anywhere. You don't move it. You don't talk about it. You let it go, and you pray you're not already being watched." "I'm not scared of—" "I'm not talking about them," Reuben snapped. "I'm talking about the people who clean things up, the ones who make folks like us vanish. You think you're the first good man who wanted to do right by something like this?" Caleb's jaw clenched. He looked back toward the fire. The creature hadn't stirred, but something in the room felt different now, as if it had heard, as if it knew it was being discussed, judged, measured. Then something shifted. It moved, slowly, with effort. It pushed itself up. Not all the way, just enough to crawl. Caleb didn't speak, didn't stop it. It crawled past him, trembling but determined. Each limb moved with care, deliberate and quiet. It moved to the door down the short hall, the one he hadn't opened in months. Grant's room. It stopped at the threshold, paused, then pushed the door with a weak arm. The hinges groaned, and the room opened like a memory unspooled. Caleb stood frozen. He hadn't meant to unlock that door. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. But the creature crawled in, pulled itself toward the pile of gear at the foot of the bed. The old parka, the faded flannel, the boots too large for anyone else. It curled into the heap and exhaled. Then silence, as if it had known exactly where to go, exactly who it belonged to, and maybe, somehow, exactly what had been lost there. Caleb stepped forward but stopped at the doorway. He leaned his hand against the frame. No words came, not even in his own head. That night the snow came back, thicker, heavier, but quieter too. Caleb sat in the main room again, lights dim, coffee untouched. He hadn't made another call. Wouldn't. A different sound came then. Not wind, not wood. A knock, not on the door, but beneath the floor. 3 sharp raps, hollow, measured, directly under the porch. He stood, waited. Nothing more came. He opened the front door slowly. The snow was already knee-deep again. No shapes, no movement. Just the soundless presence of something unseen holding still just out of reach. He didn't call out. He didn't shine a light. He closed the door, locked it quietly, and stood in the dark for a long time. That night he opened Grant's door again. Walked in. The creature, still curled in the old parka, lifted its head as he approached, eyes half-lidded, but aware. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He sat down on the edge of the bed, slowly, deliberately, and placed a hand on its back, just once. The breath beneath it didn't quicken, didn't flinch. It settled deeper into the warmth, as if it had found something it had lost long ago, or maybe something it had never known. And Caleb, who hadn't let himself feel in years, stayed there until the fire in the other room burned low and the cabin sighed into sleep. He didn't know what would come next, didn't know what lines he had crossed, or how long he had before someone came looking. But he knew this. He had taken something in that night, something rare, something hunted, something watching. And now, like it or not, he was no longer just a man on the mountain. He was part of the secret too. And secrets like this didn't get to walk away. The days blurred after that. Snow came, then sun, then snow again. The storm held on longer than most years, but inside the cabin, time moved differently. Not slower, just quieter. Caleb didn't mark the calendar anymore. He didn't count how long it had been since the shape on the porch had become something else. Something breathing, something watching. Something that slept now curled into Grant's old parka, as if it had always known where to go. Each morning Caleb lit the fire first thing. By now he didn't need to watch it as closely. He had a rhythm. 2 logs, twisted birch bark, 1 match. The kettle followed. The same goat's milk, warmed just past lukewarm. That old ceramic bowl with the crack near the lip. He slid it near the creature without words. By the 5th morning, it didn't need coaxing anymore. It sat up slowly, took the bowl, cradled it in both hands. Thumb to thumb, sipped like it remembered how to hold something without breaking it. That same low sound, barely audible, rose from its chest whenever it sat near the fire. Not a growl, not a warning. A vibration that seemed to settle the air around them, like it was smoothing out the silence before it fell asleep again. On the 9th day, it touched his shoulder. Just once. It was evening. The fire was high. Caleb had just turned to stoke it when he felt it, an open hand, placed gently, then withdrawn. No pressure, no message, just presence. That was the night he started talking again. Not full conversations, not explanations, just words. Words Grant used to like. Half-remembered stories, pieces of weather, the name of trees. He didn't call it anymore. not in his head. But he didn't name it out loud either. Not yet. Not until the 13th day. The snow had melted back just enough to uncover the edge of the southern slope behind the cabin. The creek that ran near the old boulder, Caleb knew it by heart. It fed from a spring higher up, one most hikers didn't know about. He called it the place no one was meant to see. That spring had healed him once, or at least steadied him after Grant died. Now he wondered if it might help again. He built a small enclosure, just a quiet space behind the cabin, shielded by snow-faded tarps and rough-cut logs. It wasn't a cage. It was a promise. A space to breathe, to recover, to move without being hunted. He left the side facing the forest open, not out of trust, but something older than trust. A kind of instinct that said, if they wanted to come, they already had. He spent hours watching it sleep, then walk, then crouch near the fire like it was remembering how to be still in someone else's world. He started leaving the door open during daylight. It never ran, never wandered too far, but it always returned. Every evening, just before sleep, it did something that made his heart tighten in a way he didn't understand. It placed its forehead lightly against his shoulder, or chest, or back, just once, like a ritual, a silent greeting. Then curled near the warmth, arms crossed over its own ribs, breath deep and even. By the 4th night, Caleb found himself waiting for it. That gentle contact, that shared silence. He called it Kindle, not because of the fire, but because of the word's older meaning, to stir, to awaken. Something long asleep inside him had been moved. One morning just past sunrise, Caleb stepped out to split wood and saw Kindle crouched near the edge of the trees, not hiding, just watching. Its breath fogged in the air. It turned its head slightly when it sensed him, then returned its gaze to the tree line. There was something standing there, not near, far enough to blur, but tall, motionless. Not a bear, not a tree. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stood, watching. Kindle didn't run. Caleb didn't shout. No fear passed between them. The figure disappeared into the green without a sound. That night, Kindle stayed closer. That soft vibration in its chest didn't stop even when it slept. Later that week, Caleb wandered farther south than usual. He followed the creek, the path he'd taken with Grant years ago. Not out of memory, out of habit. The thaw had cleared a narrow path of pebbles where the water ran low. Then he saw them, stones, lined up, not stacked, not natural, laid in a perfect curve across the water's edge. Soft, deliberate placement. A line, a border. He stopped just before crossing. Something about it made him pause. He wasn't scared, but he stepped forward anyway. 2 feet passed, then a sound. Behind him, a shift in weight, a scrape. He turned. A large stone had rolled from the ridge above, just enough to block the narrow path behind him. Not violent, not dangerous, just directional. He studied it, then looked up at the trees. No movement, but he felt it. He was not alone. When he returned to the cabin, Kindle was standing at the back wall, hand resting lightly against the window frame. He didn't speak. Neither did Caleb. But something passed between them, a kind of mutual understanding that didn't need words. Kindle had come from law, from order, not chaos, not savagery, and the forest, whatever lived deeper within it, wasn't warning him. It was guiding him. He remembered what Reuben had said. People don't vanish because they find something terrible. They vanish because they stumble past a line they were never meant to cross. The next day, Caleb sat outside with Kindle at dusk. Kindle pressed its forehead against his shoulder, as always. But this time, it stayed longer, breathing, listening. He didn't say a word. He just leaned back slightly, letting the weight settle. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't known he'd missed. Stillness. But not emptiness. Something alive, choosing to be near him. The line in the forest was still there. So were the laws that shaped it. But tonight, those laws had not shut him out. They had made room, and that was more terrifying than anything else. Because if there were rules, there were also consequences. And soon, someone would break them. Not them. Not Kindle, but the world beyond the trees. It never played by the old rules anymore. And when it came, the forest would answer. But until then, Kindle slept, head near his chest, breath rising and falling. And somewhere, not far beyond the pine, something else was watching, waiting, measuring the man who dared to care for what wasn't his, and deciding, in silence, whether mercy was still worth protecting. By the 8th morning, the silence didn't feel like solitude anymore. It felt like something holding its breath. Caleb had stopped marking days, but the number had etched itself into him anyway. He could feel it in his spine. Day 8 was different. The air was too still. The birds hadn't come down to the feeder. The wind hadn't carried the usual sounds from the gorge. And Kindle, he hadn't seen her yet this morning. Not by the woodpile. Not behind the tarp line. Just the soft hollow where she'd slept. Still warm. The outline still fresh. He poured the milk anyway. Set the bowl down by the hearth. Waited. That was when he heard it. Tires. Not roaring. Not spinning. Just crunching. Slow. Deliberate. The unmistakable sound of rubber overthawing gravel and pine needles. No one should be here. He moved to the window, staying behind the curtain. A tan pickup. Mid-90s Ford. The kind you didn't see anymore unless someone loved it enough to keep rebuilding. It rolled halfway up the incline, stopped just before the stumps, and idled. Then the engine cut off. Door opened, closed. Footsteps. Not heavy, but purposeful. And then a figure. A woman. She stood in the clearing like someone who had waited too long to change her mind. She wasn't dressed for pleasantries. Mud-flecked jeans, work boots, an old army green coat that didn't fit her right. Auburn hair pulled into a tight, low twist. Her face was drawn, but not tired. Just alert. Caleb didn't recognize her. And yet, something about the way she stood reminded him of the way Grant used to look before saying something he'd been holding in for too long. He opened the door before she could knock. They stared at each other for a moment. Neither spoke. Then she said, "I'm looking for Caleb Bishop." "You found him." She nodded once. "Name's Evie Sloan." She didn't offer her hand. He didn't either. "You're a long way up," he said. "I know." He waited. She looked past him toward the shadowed inside of the cabin. "I won't stay long." He stepped aside anyway. "Come in." She hesitated, then crossed the threshold like it meant something. That was the moment. That exact step. Because Kindle had returned. From behind the chimney, where the shadow met the wall, she emerged. Not cautious, not fearful. Just present. Moved quietly on 2 feet like a memory half awake. Taller now. Stronger than when Caleb first pulled her in. Fur clean and dry. Eyes steady. She crossed the room in 3 soft steps and sat. Right on Caleb's shoulder. Just sat. Legs tucked against him. One arm loosely curled. As if this was something they did every day. Evie froze. Her mouth didn't fall open. Her knees didn't give out. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just stared. For a long, long time. Caleb didn't say anything. Neither did Kindle. Then Evie, voice nearly cracking but not, whispered, "That sound." "What sound?" "I've heard that before." Then he heard it too. That soft, deep vibration from Kindle's chest. Barely audible. Like a hum from inside a tree. A sound that wasn't for anyone but itself. Evie stepped closer. Kindle watched her without blinking. And then, very slowly, she tilted her head. Just a bit. Like she recognized the ache behind the woman's eyes. Evie looked like someone trying very hard not to fall apart. "I used to make that same sound," she said. "When I rocked my son." Caleb looked at her, but she didn't return it. "I lost him 4 winters ago. Fever took him fast. They couldn't get the road cleared in time." She sat down on the nearest bench like the weight had finally claimed her. Kindle didn't move, but her breath shifted. Slower now, as if she understood. Evie looked directly at her. and for the first time since walking through the door, she wasn't afraid. Just wrecked in a different way. "I think I understand what this is," she said softly. What she is. Caleb didn't ask how. He didn't need to. The room had changed. The air had bent. There was no longer any explaining to do. Evie stood again, walked to the window, and then stopped cold. "What is that?" Caleb followed her gaze. 3 shapes stood just inside the tree line. Too still to be wildlife. Too large to be human. They didn't move. Didn't advance. Just stood in silence like a council of old things watching something unfold. "Jesus," Evie whispered. "They come every night," Caleb said. "They're not here to attack." "No. They're here to see." "Yes." She turned back to him. "What are you going to do?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know anymore. Evie walked back toward the door, then turned. "You can't hide her forever." "I'm not hiding her. I'm protecting her." Evie shook her head. "That's not the same thing." He looked at Kindle, still resting on his shoulder. "I don't want her to be hunted," he said quietly. "Then let her be what she is, not what you need her to be." Silence returned, but it wasn't heavy. It was necessary. Evie crossed the room again, crouched slowly until she was eye level with Kindle. Kindle watched her. Then, with an almost imperceptible motion, placed a hand on Evie's chest, over her heart. Evie closed her eyes. When she opened them, tears had welled, but none fell. "I won't tell anyone," she said. "Not ever." But then her voice hardened, just slightly. "She deserves to live like she's meant to. Not in hiding. Not as a secret." Caleb nodded once. That was the only answer he could give. Outside, the wind picked up, but not sharp. Just cold. Honest. Evie looked through the window again at the 3 shadows still waiting at the forest's edge. "They're not just watching her," she said. He didn't speak. "They're watching you." He felt it too. Not judgment. Not threat. Something more ancient. A measure of trust with no language. She stepped toward the door, paused. "If you ever need someone to stand with you," she said without looking back. "I've already lost everything once. I can do it again." Then she opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The truck engine didn't start right away. She sat in the cab for nearly 5 minutes, then drove away, back into the trees. Caleb stood at the doorway until the sound disappeared. When he turned, Kindle was still looking out the window, still listening, still choosing to stay. And deep in the forest, the watchers turned too, not vanishing, not approaching, just shifting. Because now, the secret was shared, but it had not been broken. And something in the way the trees stood said, for now, that was enough. The town hadn't seen Caleb Bishop in almost 6 months. That was what people said when his truck finally rolled down the main road into town, one crisp October morning, just before the frost set in for real. Folks said his hair was longer, grayer, and his shoulders had that look of someone carrying something too large to name. But no one asked much. That's the kind of town it was. Small enough to notice, polite enough to pretend not to. The fall festival was already underway. Orange and gold streamers hung limp over the sidewalks. A hay bale maze had been set up in front of the church. Kids ran between booths with cider-stained sleeves and candy apples stuck to their mittens. It should have felt warm, familiar. But to Caleb, it all felt out of rhythm, too loud, too exposed. He parked by the feed store and stepped out slow, hands shoved in his coat pockets. He didn't want to linger. He needed salt blocks, goat feed, and maybe a few gallons of kerosene. He hadn't meant to stay long, but he hadn't planned for Sheriff Wade. Wade always stood like a man used to being listened to. Not aggressive, just sturdy. A former game warden turned sheriff. He wore that uniform like a second skin. He spotted Caleb before Caleb saw him, walked over without rush, just a hand up in lazy greeting. "Bishop," he said. Caleb gave him a nod. "Sheriff, didn't expect to see you down. Didn't plan on it." Wade glanced at the truck, then at the list in Caleb's hand. "All stocked up before the snow." Trying. A pause. Then Wade shifted slightly. Voice lower. "You know, there's been some talk. Strange prints out near Dead Man's Ridge. Bigger than grizzly, longer stride. Some hikers turned back last week. Caleb said nothing. Wade scratched at his chin. I figured with you being up there, maybe you've seen anything worth reporting. I've seen winter come early. Wade smiled, not wide. Just enough to show he'd been expecting that kind of answer. Well, he said, if you do see anything, dangerous or unnatural, you let me know. A lot of folks starting to spook. Caleb didn't blink. Spooked people make dangerous choices. Wade gave him a long look, then clapped his shoulder once, not too hard. Take care of yourself, Caleb. He walked off toward the cider booth like nothing had been said at all. But the pressure didn't lift, not all day. And when Caleb turned to leave, another figure stepped out from the crowd. Clint Rudd, the kind of man who never just appeared. He arrived. Clint had that sharp smile and cleaner boots than most men who claimed to hunt for a living. A former contractor who'd made his money in land deals and rumors, Clint had a way of talking that always left folks owing him something, even if they didn't remember what. Well, I'll be damned, Clint said, stepping in close. The mountain man returns. Caleb kept walking, but Clint followed, boots too quiet on the pavement. Glad I caught you. I've been hearing some real interesting chatter lately. People seeing shadows, hearing things. You ever notice how quick these stories catch fire when the cold sets in? Caleb reached his truck without replying. Clint placed a small object on the hood, wrapped in a handkerchief, tied with twine. Caleb stared at it. Clint smiled. Consider it a gift, a way of saying I see you. And I know good secrets are never free. He tapped the hood once, then turned and walked away. Caleb didn't touch the thing, not until the engine was running and he was halfway back to the ridgeline. When he did, he unwrapped the cloth and found an old trail cam chip inside, the kind used for motion tracking near salt licks. He didn't plug it in. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what Clint was offering. Not proof, not yet, just pressure. That night, back at the cabin, the wind came in fast, wild, high, dragging cold through the trees like a warning. Caleb checked the fences twice, reinforced the latches, and moved the wood pile closer to the door. Kindle stayed near the back window all evening. She hadn't spoken, of course, not with words, but her presence said more than enough. She didn't pace. She didn't tremble. She watched. And Caleb felt the shift in her even before he saw what she'd done. The next morning, the frost covered the glass so thick it looked like lace. He wiped a spot clear with his sleeve and saw it. A swirl, drawn on the window with one finger, a perfect spiral, smudged gently into the condensation from the inside. He hadn't taught her that. She hadn't seen him do it. But she'd done it anyway, and it matched the carvings he'd seen months ago, deep in the rock face by the spring. The same quiet symbol. A sign he didn't understand, but one he couldn't ignore. He stepped outside and paused on the porch, then froze. Paint. Red, faded but deliberate. Marks along the trees. Circular slashes near the base, barely visible from the trail. He walked down the path, heart thudding now, followed the signs for nearly 100 feet. And there, along the main path, he saw it. A single rock, cleaned off, and sitting on it, a small coil of paracord. Bright orange. Hikers didn't leave things like that. Hunters didn't either. But men like Clint, they left markers, claims, bait. Kindle appeared beside him then, silent as always. She looked down at the cord, then up at him. He didn't speak. But she reached out and touched the red slash on the nearest tree. Just once. And then she turned and walked back toward the cabin, slow but certain. He followed, jaw tight. That night, Caleb sat beside the fire, listening to the wind claw at the walls. Evie's voice echoed in his memory. Let her be what she is. He looked at Kindle, curled beside the hearth, breathing deep, the spiral still faint on the window behind her. Then he said it out loud. I'm not scared of being called crazy. I'm scared of what they'll do to you. She didn't stir. But the fire cracked louder. Outside, the forest leaned closer. And somewhere in town, someone had started watching back. Not the sheriff, not the hunters, but the kind of men who moved behind cameras. Men who didn't knock. And Caleb knew the clock had started. His cabin wasn't invisible anymore. And some secrets didn't stay buried just because you loved them enough to hide them. It started with the smell. Not fire, not rot, but cold iron. Metal twisted in the dark. Caleb woke before the noise came, before the wind shifted, before the first snap of pine against pine warned that something had breached the tree line. Kindle was already sitting up, still, eyes trained on the cabin wall like she could see through it. Her chest rose, fell, held. A long breath. Then another. Snow had started falling again around midnight. Light at first, barely a dusting, but now it thickened, layering like memory, quiet, slow, suffocating. Then came the voices, muffled, slurred through wind, somewhere between shouting and whispering, like men trying not to be heard by the wrong ears. 2 at least, maybe 3. Southridge, close. Caleb rose without sound, pulled the rifle down from the hooks, though he knew it wouldn't be used. It was habit, not threat. He checked the bolt, left the safety on. Kindle hadn't moved, but her shoulders had changed, squared now, not frightened, focused. Caleb stepped to the window and caught the faintest glint. Light hitting something unnatural in the trees. A trap. New. Shiny. Too clean for the woods. They'd set bait. He moved fast after that. Coat, boots, rope. He opened the rear door just enough to step out without creaking the hinges, then motioned for Kindle to stay back. But she didn't. She followed without question, without hesitation, without fear. She'd grown. Not just taller, stronger. The way she moved now had shifted. No more shuffle, no more hesitation. She walked like something returning to a place she once owned. They crossed the lower path behind the goat shed and moved past the frozen creek. The snow silenced everything but their breath. Then they saw it. A snare. Thin wire loop strung low across a game trail. Fresh prints around it. Boot prints. Wide. Not standard issue. Heavy treads. Men used to carrying weight. Caleb knelt, examined the wire, saw the teeth in the locking coil. Military grade. Kindle stood 5 feet behind him, staring at something just beyond the brush. He turned. Another trap. This one open. But the snow around it had been disturbed. Something had been caught and freed. Fur on the teeth, dark, still wet. He stood, heart pounding now. Then, footsteps. Not theirs. From the east. Coming fast. They ducked behind the low rocks just before the flashlight beam cut through the trees. 2 men, both armed, one with a rifle slung low, the other holding a tablet in one gloved hand, scanning. "There's something big out here," one muttered. Bait was touched, but not tripped. Could have been the storm. Could have been smarter than we thought. They moved on. Didn't see Caleb, didn't see Kindle. Didn't see what was behind them. A shadow. 7 feet tall, moving silently through the snow as if it had always belonged to the dark. It didn't attack. It watched. And when the men were out of range, it vanished. Caleb exhaled only after his lungs began to burn. They returned to the cabin under cover of wind. Kindle paused at the porch, looked back once. He followed her gaze. The path was clear. Too clear. The forest had made space, as if allowing their return. He closed the door behind them and latched it twice. By morning, the baits were gone. All of them. Not stolen. Not destroyed. Gone. Every trap had been sprung, dismantled, twisted into symbols. The largest was hung from the pine tree near the spring, bent into a spiral. The same shape Kindle had drawn in frost. Caleb stared at it from the window. His hands didn't shake, but his chest ached. Kindle stood behind him, her reflection in the glass just a breath behind his own. Then came the knocking. Not on the door, not under the porch, but on the far end of the wall, where Grant's room used to be. 3 knocks. Hard, slow, then silence. He opened the back door, rifle in hand, though he didn't raise it. Nothing. No footprints. Just a shape in the snow. A message. A handprint, twice the size of his own, pressed flat into the snow, fingers spread, palm deep. Caleb closed the door. Kindle was standing by the fireplace now, her shoulders no longer squared in fear, but lifted, like armor, like choice. She looked at him, then walked to the door again, not fast, but not asking permission. Caleb stepped in front of her, blocked the handle. "Not yet," he said, but her eyes said something different. She was ready. To protect, to return, to choose. He backed away. That night, the wind howled through the ridges. But it wasn't empty. It carried something. A rhythm, far off, distant, not random, like a voice passed between mountains. And when Caleb stepped outside, Kindle beside him, he saw them. In the dark, among the trees. Figures, dozens, standing, waiting, not threatening, not attacking. Witnesses. Then, from deep within the trees, a crack, a snap, metal again, and a scream. Short, human, cut off fast. The forest answered, not with blood, but with silence, the kind that left nothing more to say. At sunrise, Caleb found the trap, the one set nearest the spring. It was broken, but not empty. Inside, coiled like a snake waiting for judgment, was the rifle, bent in half, tied in place with red paracord. No blood, no boots, no bodies, just that, a warning. Not to Caleb, but to anyone else watching. Kindle didn't leave the cabin that day. She stood by the fire, hands still, breath steady, and Caleb understood something for the first time. She wasn't the one being protected anymore. She was becoming protector, not just of herself, of him, of the land, of the law beneath the soil that no longer answered to men. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say, only to feel. The air had changed. The forest had spoken, and soon the world beyond the trees would want to know what it said. But they wouldn't get it in words. They'd get it in silence, in symbols, in choices made by those who remembered the old ways. And for now, that would have to be enough. The first thing Caleb noticed was the quiet. Not the good kind, not the deep forest quiet that settled into your chest and told you everything was where it belonged. This was thinner, sharper, like the pause before a verdict. Kindle stood at the window long before the sun came up, her breath fogging a small oval in the glass. She didn't pace. She didn't hum. She simply watched the dark thin itself into morning. Caleb knew, without knowing how, that she could leave now if she wanted to. The paths were open. The watchers had shifted. The night before had loosened something old. Freedom lay just beyond the line of trees, patient and waiting. But Kindle didn't go. She turned instead, padded back across the floor, and pressed her forehead gently to Caleb's chest. The ritual again. The same small, deliberate contact she always made before sleep, before storms, before change. This time it lingered. Not long, just long enough for him to feel the weight of it. Long enough for him to understand that whatever happened next would be something she chose to face awake. By mid-morning, the road carried sound again. Not one truck, two, maybe three. Caleb heard them before he saw them. Engines straining up the grade, the noise cutting through the trees with none of the forest's usual courtesy. He didn't reach for the rifle. He didn't need to. He already knew who it would be. The town had been watching back, and now it had decided to blink. Evie arrived first. She didn't park near the cabin. She stopped down by the bend, where the old logging spur disappeared into alder and rock. She walked the rest of the way, hands empty, shoulders tight. Her eyes went immediately to Kindle, then back to Caleb. Something was wrong. Not fear, pressure. The kind that comes from a corner you didn't see closing. "I didn't want to bring this here," Evie said, voice low. "But he left me no choice." Caleb nodded once. He didn't ask who. He already knew. "He says if I don't help him draw her out, he'll bring others, cameras, dogs. He says he already knows enough to make noise that won't die down." Kindle tilted her head, listening, not to the words, but to the cadence beneath them. Evie swallowed. "I won't let him hurt her," Evie said quickly. "I won't, I swear, but I can't stop him alone." Caleb looked past her, toward the road, toward the place where human decisions always arrived louder than they should. He felt the forest tighten, not in anger. Inattention, they came sooner than he expected. Sheriff Wade's cruiser crested the ridge just after noon. Lights off, moving careful. Behind him, Clint Rudd's truck followed at a respectful distance, like a man who knew exactly how close he could get without being told to leave. Caleb stepped out onto the porch before either vehicle stopped. He wanted them to see him first. He wanted this to be his ground while it still could be. Wade got out alone. He didn't touch his sidearm, didn't raise his voice. He stood with his boots planted, eyes scanning the trees, then coming back to Caleb. "Afternoon," he said. "We've had some reports." Caleb didn't answer right away. Kindle moved to stand beside him, tall now, unmistakable in the open light. There was no hiding her anymore. Wade's breath caught, just for a second, long enough to tell Caleb that whatever training the man had, it hadn't prepared him for this. "That's not a bear," Wade said. "No," Caleb replied. Clint stayed by his truck, leaning casually against the hood, hands in his pockets. He smiled like this was a show he'd paid to see. Wade cleared his throat. "I'm not here to escalate," he said, "but I can't pretend I don't see what's in front of me." Caleb felt Kindle shift. Her shoulders squared. Not in threat, in readiness. "This doesn't belong to the county," Caleb said, "and it doesn't belong to you." Wade nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but once folks start talking, it stops being about what belongs to who." Evie stepped forward then, just a little. Enough to draw Clint's attention. That was the plan. Caleb saw it too late. Clint straightened, eyes sharp. "There she is," Clint said lightly. "I was wondering if you'd show." Evie didn't look at him. She looked at Kindle. "I'll lead you where you think you want to go," she said, "but you won't find what you're looking for." Clint laughed. "We'll see." They moved out an hour later. Not together, not as a group. Evie led Clint down the lower trail, toward the ridge that curved away from the spring. Wade stayed back, radio pressed to his shoulder, voice tight, careful. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing with Kindle, watching Evie's back disappear into the trees. He felt the risk she was taking. He felt it settle into him like a debt he didn't know how to repay. "Now," he said softly to Kindle. She knew what he meant. They walked toward the boundary, toward the line of stones by the creek. The place the forest had marked, then unmarked, then marked again when the rules mattered. Kindle slowed as they approached. Her breath deepened. She stopped just short of the stones and looked back at him. For the first time since the night he'd pulled her from the porch, she hesitated. Caleb stepped past her, crossed the line himself. The stones didn't move this time. No warning, no redirection. The forest had already decided this part was allowed. From the trees ahead, shapes emerged. Quiet, solid, tall, not rushing, not hiding. They formed a loose circle, far enough to leave space, close enough to be undeniable. Among them, one stepped forward, smaller, younger, its fur lighter, its movements less assured. A child, by their measure. It looked at Kindle with open curiosity, then with something like recognition. The same ritual gesture followed. Forehead touching air. A shared breath. Caleb felt his throat close. This was the choice. Not his, never his. He stepped back. Hands open, body still. Everything in him wanted to beg, to bargain, to promise something impossible. He did none of it. He watched. Kindle stepped forward. She mirrored the gesture, touching foreheads with the other young one. The sound rose from her chest again, low and steady, the hum she used to calm herself, to signal peace. The other answered, softer, unsure. The circle tightened just a fraction, like a held breath. Then Kindle turned. She walked back to Caleb. She pressed her forehead to his chest again. The ritual once more. But this time, she didn't linger. She stepped away and stood beside him, shoulder nearly touching his arm. Her choice, made without words. A murmur moved through the circle. Not anger, not approval. Acceptance. The young one was guided back, gentle hands steering it away. The watchers receded, melting into the green, leaving the line intact, and the silence changed. Caleb exhaled. Behind them, a shout echoed through the trees. Clint's voice, sharp, frustrated. Then Evie's, louder, fierce, leading him the wrong way on purpose, deeper into ground that would not welcome him. Wade's radio crackled, orders clipped and careful. The county would step back, not retreat, not advance, just pause. For now, Caleb didn't look back. He didn't need to. He felt the forest loosen again, just enough. Kindle stood taller than she ever had, not because she was growing, but because she was standing in something she had chosen to carry. They returned to the cabin as the light thinned. Evie came back at dusk, breathless, shaken, eyes bright with relief and something like pride. "He didn't find anything," she said. "And he won't. Not today." Caleb nodded. "You didn't have to do that." Evie shrugged. "I did." Night came down gentle, like it hadn't heard what the day had tried to do. Kindle slept by the fire, her back to the door, her face turned toward the room. Caleb sat nearby, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath. Outside, the forest settled. Not finished, not resolved, just waiting, the way it always had. The choice had been made, not by force, not by fear, by will. And that, Caleb knew, was the kind of thing the world never forgave easily. Nor did it forget. 2 winters passed. The first one came early, wrapped in wind and warnings. But it didn't break them. The second came quiet, gentle even, as if the forest itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The cabin was still standing, though the porch had warped slightly under weight and weather. The front steps creaked like old knees, and the windows fogged quicker now. But it was home, more than it had ever been before. Kindle didn't sleep as much anymore. She walked more, watched more. Her frame had lengthened, and her eyes held that dark shimmer of thought too deep to guess. She didn't hum the same way, but every now and then, when the fire burned just right and the wind pressed soft against the chimney, Caleb swore he could still hear it. That low, grounded rhythm, like memory braided into sound. He sat by the window most mornings, coffee in hand, blanket over his legs, watching the snow slide down the pines in slow, elegant sheets. He didn't write much, didn't call. The phone still worked, but the line stayed quiet. Only one letter had arrived in months. From Reuben Calder. Thick envelope, no return address, just Caleb's name printed in that scratchy old caps lock handwriting. Inside, a folded note, a clipping, and a single line in pen. "You did the right thing, even if no one will ever know it." The clipping was short. Clint Rudd arrested in federal wildlife sting. Details were sparse. Something about illegal tracking devices, banned traps, threats of violence. Caleb didn't read it twice. He didn't need to. Later that week, Sheriff Wade made one last trip up the ridge. No sirens, no uniform. Just him. A paper bag of black licorice and a thermos of coffee. They sat on the porch for an hour, maybe more. Didn't talk much. Just watched the snow. Before he left, Wade said one thing that stuck. "They're shutting down the investigation, all of it. Washington says it's over." Caleb had looked at him then, really looked, and said only, "It never should have started." Wade nodded once. "I agree." He left the licorice behind, said he didn't like the flavor anyway. By January, the trails were buried again. Deer prints came and went. Owl feathers showed up at the base of the chimney one morning, arranged in a perfect circle. Kindle didn't touch them, just looked, then stepped over them without sound. Evie still visited. Less now. But when she did, she brought dried fruit and quiet eyes. She never asked what changed. Never asked if Kindle still slept by the fire, or if the watchers still came. She just stood by the stove, hands wrapped around a warm mug, and let the silence speak for them. One afternoon, after the thaw began to crack the edges of the stream, she brought a small tin box. Inside it was a photograph, black and white, blurred but not by accident. It was Kindle, 2 winters ago, in the doorway of the cabin. Her face turned slightly, the outline of Caleb just behind her. Taken from the tree line, distant, intentional. Evie held it for a long moment. Then she fed it to the stove. No drama, no words, just fire and ash. Caleb didn't stop her. That night, Kindle stood at the back door for a long time. She didn't ask to go. She didn't step out. She just watched the snow come down in soft, steady flakes that caught in the porch light and spun like they were dancing toward something sacred. Caleb found her there, hours later, still standing. He handed her the old scarf she used to carry over her shoulder. She didn't take it. Just let it hang in his hand while they stood together, neither of them speaking. The night pressing close around the glass. Sometime after midnight, she turned, and for the first time in weeks, she walked across the cabin and settled beside him. Not across the room, not curled near the wall, but on his shoulder, just like the beginning. Her breath slowed, her fingers uncurled. She slept. Outside, the wind didn't rise. The trees didn't creak. Only one sound came. 3 soft knocks, far off, deep, low against bark and snow. Not urgent, not warning, just presence. Caleb didn't move, didn't rise. He let the sound pass through him like a memory brushing skin. Later, he pulled the last of Grant's journals from the shelf, the one he hadn't opened since the hospital. Inside was a folded note, not in Grant's handwriting. His own, long forgotten, scribbled in pencil on a piece of torn envelope. There are things in these woods that don't need to be proven to be real. He placed it beside the hearth, left it there. He didn't light the fire again that night. Didn't need to. Kindle's warmth filled the room. In the dark they slept, not as secrets, not as fugitives, but as something older than explanation. 2 shapes in a cabin the world had almost forgotten, wrapped in the silence of snow and the law of something bigger than either of them. They had found each other, saved each other, and the forest, ancient, watching, patient, had made room for it. Not loudly, not forever, but for now, and for this kind of story. That was more than enough. The snow kept falling, and somewhere in the trees, something large moved quietly through the night. Not watching, not judging, just keeping pace, one echo at a time. In a world that moves faster than we can hold, where silence is often drowned out by noise and gentleness mistaken for weakness, stories like these remind us of something essential, something ancient and easily forgotten, that kindness is never wasted, that mercy, once given freely, ripples further than logic allows. And sometimes what saves us isn't strength or certainty, but the quiet decision to care for something we don't fully understand. There are truths in this life that can't be cataloged, explained, or proved, not because they aren't real, but because they live in the space between what we see and what we feel, in the way winter trees lean to shield the weaker ones, in the way a fire glows warmer when it's shared, in the way one act of compassion, offered with no reward in sight, can change the course of something far bigger than we'll ever know. This story was never just about wilderness or survival or the unknown. It was about choice, the kind that comes quietly in the middle of the night when no one is watching, the kind that asks not what is easiest or safest, but what is right, the kind of choice that defines who we are, not when the world applauds us, but when it forgets we're even here. And there's a lesson in that. That love, true love, the kind rooted in respect, not possession, is not loud, it is steady. That family isn't always born, but found, chosen, nurtured. That protecting something sacred does not always look heroic. It often looks like staying, listening, standing still. It looks like patience. It looks like surrender. It looks like trust. We forget sometimes that not every presence in this world is here to be captured, solved, or controlled. Some are here to remind us that humility is a strength, that silence can be sacred, that perhaps the most evolved thing a human being can do is to leave another being in peace. Some bonds aren't meant to be written in history books or stored in photographs. They live in memory, in snow that falls without sound, in the hush between wood creaks at night, in footprints that vanish before dawn. And if we are lucky, we carry those moments with us, not to prove they happened, but because they changed who we are. So when we hear something stirring in the forest, or feel that soft pull in our chest we can't quite name, maybe it's not just curiosity or fear. Maybe it's remembrance, a call back to something we once knew and someone we could still become. Thank you for walking with us through the quiet, through the questions, through the snow and the silence. If this story meant something to you, if it moved you, challenged you, or stayed with you in any way, we'd be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Every voice helps keep stories like this alive. And if you'd like to be here for the next one, if you're someone who still believes in wonder, in empathy, in the magic of the unknown, we invite you to subscribe, follow, and stay connected. The forest has many stories left to tell. Let's keep listening.